I got this gem of a comment this morning, and it's pretty much par for the course these days on Minds. Like, it seems like just about everybody I talk to. I wouldn't say everybody. I'd say 80% of the people I talk to on Minds these days are like this. And I think it's just, at this point, I think the only people who are subscribing to me, like the only new people who are subscribing to me, are the ones who are basically coming on so they can troll me and say that I'm a liar and say that I'm delusional and say that I'm mentally ill so that they can just like poke at me to see what I'll do next. Which, I mean, if I'm bored, that's fine. If I'm not bored, then it's kind of annoying, but whatever. And, this person, he wrote me this, and he put it more succinctly than many of the other people, but this is very much par for the course for me. And I was, I got the message, and I was driving my toddler somewhere, and I'm sitting in the car, and I've got my toddler sitting in the back seat behind me with his little blanket, and he's all curled up, and I've got some music playing, and I'm wandering around the radio looking for something good. And I'm just thinking to myself about all the stuff I've had kind of just circulating in my head lately, because I've been listening to random YouTube videos in the middle of the night when I can't sleep, and learning about all sorts of weird random stuff. But one of the videos I clicked on was this video talking about hypersexualization in sexual assault victims. So they get assaulted, and then afterwards they become hypersexualized. And I knew about this phenomenon because my father's a clinical psychologist. So I grew up, I mean, he didn't tell me when I was a little kid, but, late teens, he told me this, and I knew about it, and then I went out into the world, and I knew people, and throughout the years, I've known many people at this point who were sexually assaulted and became hypersexual afterwards. So it is a very clear phenomenon. And I can kind of relate, because when I got raped, there was this moment afterwards, like I was really frustrated, and it was like, why the fuck should I care about my body count? Like, it's a stupid number, because people who want to just come in and take whatever and then go, they can do that, because that's already been shown to me. This has been clearly demonstrated by what happened like a couple weeks ago. So why should I care about this stupid number? Like, it seems very arbitrary if people can just come in and take what they want, do what they want to you, whether you want them to or not, and then they can leave. And it's like, then you're responsible for your body count. And it's like, fuck that shit, Fuck that shit. So why should I care? Why should I care about this stupid number that everybody else says is so damn important? And, I mean, at the time, I had that thought process, and I really kind of relaxed my grip on my body count after that, because, like, up until that point, I was like, I'd go on dates with people and be like, you're really nice, and I really like you, but I'm not sure I want to move that number up any higher than it is right now, because I'm really trying to keep myself in a state where I'll look attractive to a potential partner, like somebody that I want to keep around for, a lifetime. And after that, it was like, you know what, this is a really stupid system. Like, people care about this number, and I think the only people who really, really care about this number are the people who just don't have a fucking clue what's going on in the world. Like, I get comments all the time these days, from manosphere guys. It's like, oh, I bet she has a high body count. They find out I used to be a stripper. It's like, oh yeah, totally, high body count. The fuck do you know, man? You don't know jack shit. Like, I get these comments from these people, and I think to myself, I want to put a paper bag over their heads and then just watch to see how long it takes them to figure out how to get it off. Because, you do that to cats sometimes. Like, have you ever done that to a cat, where you put a paper bag or something over their head and then just watch them, and they, like, take forever to figure it out? Like, some cats, they decide they don't want it, so they just knock it right off their face. But other cats, they just sit there for, like, minutes. Several minutes go by, and they're just sitting there with a paper bag over their head. And you do kind of start to wonder, can they figure their way out of that? Like, do they need me to come in and rescue them? The people leaving those comments, I always assume that it's going to take them at least half an hour to get a paper bag off their head. Like, really. It's going to take that long. They are that dumb. So I kind of want to see that process. So anyway, of course, I clicked on this video and I watched it because I figured it would be informational and educational and interesting. And I'm listening to these, it was a group of women, and I'm listening to all these women talking about, the choices that they made in the aftermath of assault and abuse. And it's really sad because our society has really no tolerance for people who've been the victims of these things. We just don't have a really good space for talking about these issues. And so, I feel very bad for a lot of these women. And it really made me think about my own life and my own decisions. Now, by the time I got raped, I was 21. I'd already figured out my shit, right? And at the same time, listening to them talking about how they couldn't escape sex, they couldn't escape sexuality, they couldn't escape what they felt was the external hypersexualization that the world was placing on them. I really could relate to that. I was kind of thinking about it, and I was thinking about how I should kind of make a video about this, and I'm trying to put it all into words. I think, because this is kind of it's a sex channel. It's a YouTube kind of sex channel. I talk about sexual issues a lot, not 100% of the time. I also have little weird, I did a video on my hair one time. Every once in a while I'll just do a video on something I think is interesting, but for the most part we kind of stick to sex and sex topics. And it's really funny because I got people jumping down my throat all the time over on mine. It's you do your perverted videos and you put those out into the world. It's it's a sex channel. We talk about sex here. There's gonna be a lot of sex. It's not about perversion, it's about sexual topics abortion and how that ties into human sexuality and reproduction. It's part of the subject matter. Manosphere issues. I spent a bunch of time making videos on those and talking with people in the manosphere. And so now I'm talking about trans issues because it ties back into sexuality. How is this confusing for people? Again, paper bag. I'm gonna walk up to some of these people. I'm gonna be okay, I got a stopwatch right here. I got a paper bag right here. I'm gonna put the paper bag on your head. I just want to see how long it takes you to find your way out of a paper bag. So anyway, I'm clearly a pervert for doing this, and that's just kind of the thing. That's kind of the point. I look at my life and I think that for me, because I talk about sex all the time, right? I'm talking about sex right now. And I wonder about that because that started when I was in high school. And I've been reading up on a lot of sexologists because, we're talking about sex, especially when it comes to trans issues. A lot of sexologists have really studied this. And so, of course, I'm reading what they've studied, and I'm reading about these sexologists. And some of them are weird people. Who becomes a sexologist? And it's well, sometimes it's a person with a really crazy paraphilia, and then you find out about their really crazy paraphilia, and it's okay, I thought you were a normal person up until you did that. And now I'm gonna have to reevaluate that whole perception that I had of you as a normal person, because clearly I missed some things, right? And that's the thing with a lot of sexologists. You get into the nitty-gritty, you read about their biography and, some of their history and some of the things they've done, and it's oh, wow. Especially when it's sexologists who've been studying the trans community. There have been so many times that people in the trans community attempt to discredit these sexologists because it's well, they did this really weird, perverse thing over here. And I'm looking at it as well, you're right, that is weird and perverse. And then I look at my own life and it's I'm studying all the same things these people are studying. And it's why am I studying this? And I look at my life, the span of my life through the years, and it's why have I always been so obsessed with sex? When it comes to studying it, why do I find it interesting to study? And I think it's because I just felt like I couldn't escape it. And I kind of realized that when I was listening to all these women talking about how they felt like they couldn't escape sex. And it just kind of it kind of clicked for me. It's like, not a rape victim, at least not when I was young. Obviously later on that shit happened, but that's okay. I wasn't a sexual abuse victim. Like, I wasn't a child sex abuse victim or anything like that. But as I went through puberty alongside all my peers, I really started very quickly to feel like sex was something I couldn't escape, because all around me, all of my peers were having these feelings, and I wasn't. And so it became this thing, this invisible social thing that I had to constantly navigate around, that I wasn't aware of, that I couldn't see, that I couldn't feel, and that I just couldn't understand. It was this amorphous mystery in my life. And so I felt very obligated to learn about it, because it was affecting my life and it wasn't even a part of my life. So people would get crushes on me and then they'd act weird around me and I wouldn't understand why. Or people would be trying to, to flirt with each other and I wouldn't notice that they were flirting, because I don't pay attention to that. Like, we're all teenagers. We're all kids in school. We're doing schoolwork, right? And so it was this invisible thing that I had to be aware of, because clearly I was committing social faux pas because I was oblivious to it. And I figured that out. Thank God I figured that one out pretty quickly, because I committed like a million social faux pas. I was very socially awkward. I'm still socially awkward. Realizing that sex was a thing for other people, luckily that one I figured out pretty quickly. And luckily I started trying really hard, like putting a lot of effort into being aware that sex was a thing for other people, that other people were doing, and trying to be conscientious of that so that I wouldn't commit constant, embarrassing social faux pas around people. And I think that's where my lifelong interest in sex has come from. Sex and reproduction. It's just, there's so much about it that, number one, is taboo. And anything that's taboo, you kind of look at it like, okay, well, why is this so taboo? Why is this something we shouldn't talk about? And then number two, it's all around. It's everywhere. And I mean, sexologists will say, and they're not entirely wrong, that most human activities tie back into human sexuality. And it's like, that's fascinating. But then people read it the wrong way. They assume that people who are doing basic human activities are immensely horny while they're doing basic human activities. And it's like, not quite. Not quite. It doesn't quite work like that. It means that human sexuality threads its way through our entire lives in so many very subtle ways. And it's ever present. It's constant, because it's part of who we are as living biological entities. And so, of course, it's everywhere. And it's fascinating, but because it's so inescapable, it's like, well, it's also very interesting. This is part of who we are. This is part of human existence. But also it's just inescapable. I hit my teens and all of a sudden people started seeing me as a sex object. And I think ever since then, all throughout my life, people have seen me as a sex object. And I mean, instead of becoming hypersexualized or feeling like a victim as a result of it, I got frustrated and I got mad. And I decided to capitalize on it. It's like, okay, if you guys are all of you going to be treating me like a sex object, I'm going to become an exotic dancer and you're going to fucking pay me. I'm going to take home a nice fat paycheck because you guys can't figure out how to stop treating me like a walking, talking sex toy. So pay up. And that was my attitude. And I think for me, at least, it worked out pretty well. every time I make a new video about my decision to become an exotic dancer, I remember yet another reason that it was a good idea for me to become an exotic dancer. It was something that I needed in my life. I'm very convinced of that. And no one's ever going to convince me otherwise. There were just too many things in my life that really needed that. And so too many aspects of my life were immensely improved by becoming an exotic dancer. It doesn't work like that for most people. And this is where you kind of see that difference. I wasn't a sexual abuse victim. And I wasn't a victim of sexual assault, even though, like, technically I got sexually assaulted like a week before I was scheduled to become an exotic dancer. That was because my boyfriend wanted to teach me a lesson, and so he thought this was a great way to do it because he was a fucking idiot and narcissist and whatever. But I mean, I already had myself scheduled up for it. I'd already bought a bunch of crap so that I'd have gear for it. I already knew where I was going. I already knew what I wanted to do. That was the whole reason I got raped in the first place. He wanted to stop me, and I just wasn't going to be stopped. So, I don't think it counts. Personally, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm missing something big here, but I just don't think it counts that much. But for me, it was all about, like, for me, I really intellectualized it. For me, it was this interesting, weird human phenomenon that I wanted to wrap my head around and study. And so, you know, I became an exotic dancer and I earned money off of it. And so I was paying all my bills and paying my rent and moving around the country and basically doing whatever I wanted to do with my life as a result of being an exotic dancer. And, you know, sex just became part of my world. Sex became my world. And I've listened to all these women who, they talk about how at the time when they were experiencing a lot of these heterosexual experiences they were having, you know, they told themselves they were being empowered and they told themselves that they were taking back control. And then later on, after therapy, they realized that they hadn't been taking control at all. They were just a victim and they were reacting. And then they're upset about it and kind of ashamed of it and they feel bad about it. And I feel bad that they feel bad, because that sounds painful. And that just isn't where I was. Like, I look at my time as an exotic dancer and I look at the process by which I started to reintegrate myself with my body as, you know, as a dancer. Like, there was a crowd of people that were all staring at my naked body, but they were staring at me before I got naked, so it doesn't really matter. Like, there's always been people who've been sexualizing me. There's always been people who've been staring at me. You know, if I passively acquire a paycheck in the meantime while I'm doing my workout routine, I mean, that's just icing on the cake as far as I'm concerned. And that's how I looked at it at the time. And I still haven't really gotten out of that mindset. So, I mean, at some point, somebody might be able to explain to me in a way how I'm really a victim and how I was, you know, degrading myself or some shit. Like, everybody's always trying to tell me that I was degrading myself. And really, I mean, for me, it's like I was going through my own internal process. I'd go up on stage and I'd focus on moving my body and becoming a human being who was inside of a body, because up until that point wasn't really a thing that was going on for me. And so by moving, by dancing, by experiencing my own physical self in a very athletic way, I was recovering from my own problems. And I really just did not give a shit about anybody else. And I think that's kind of how I experience a lot of sex a lot of the time. Like, other people have their sexual feelings and they're interesting. Definitely something to take note of. It's like, oh, that person's got all sorts of sexual feelings all over there. It's interesting. But, I mean, for the most part, that's not where I'm at. That's not where my head is, you know. That's not me. That's not what I'm doing. And even to this day, I still study sex because it's interesting stuff, taboo and all that. And I had always assumed that, first I assumed once I got married, people would start, maybe not seeing me as quite so much of a sex object. Like, look, see that? I'm married, I'm wifed up, you can't do anything with this, so you might as well move on to greener pastures, huh? And people just didn't seem to figure that out. Like, it still wasn't a thing. Like, people didn't quite get that through their heads. And it's like, okay, well, give it a little time. And then I had kids, and it's like, look, I'm currently pregnant. I'm fat. My skin always gets really horrible when I'm pregnant, so my skin doesn't look good, and I don't feel good, and I can't move around the way I like to, and I'm a little chunkier than I normally would be. Like, I'm a walking mess, right? My whole body is off kilter. Surely people aren't going to sexualize me now, right? Or even better yet, after I give birth and I've got a baby, that the baby's adorable, but I look like absolute hell. It's like, surely people are not going to sexualize me now. No, they still see me as a sex object. It's not as positive as it used to be. Like when I was an exotic dancer, they were like, ooh, that's hot, I want to bang that. Now it's like, ooh, that's a sex object, but it's kind of gross. I'm still an it in their minds. I can tell. It's pretty obvious. And so now I'm sitting here and I'm getting all these comments from all these people who are calling me a pervert, and they're telling me that I'm, telling me straight up that they think I'm a pedophile, because aren't all trans people pedophiles? And you're a trans person, right? So you must be a pedophile, right? And I'm just sitting there looking at it, and it's like, It clicked for me today while I was in the car with my toddler in the back seat with his little blanket. It clicked for me that I am never going to escape the perception from other people that I'm a sex object, or at least a fundamentally sexual being, like all about the sex. That's what I am to them. That's all I am to them. That's all I'm ever going to be to them. To so many of the people that I meet in this world. Like, I tend to think of myself as a primarily intellectual being. That's just my own self-perception. It's like, I think a lot. I think too much. And that's how I see myself, because that's how I operate. And when I'm interacting with the world, that's how I'm interacting with the world. It would be nice if I was a calmer, more mellow person, but I'm not. This is me. And this is my self-perception, and honestly, I think it's the perception that my husband has of me and a few other people who are very close to me. But that's not what I think the majority of people see when they look at me. I think that, and I always thought that I'd just outgrow it. I thought eventually I'd get old enough. I mean, I'm getting close to 40 here. I'm getting really close to 40, like alarmingly close to 40. I'm sitting there like hitting the brakes as much as I can, like, come on, please tell me we can slow this train down. No, I'm gonna hit 40, going like full speed ahead. It's coming right up. I'm old, right? Surely I'm old enough that people aren't constantly going to look at me in a sexual light. But it dawned on me today, that's never going to happen. I'm never going to escape other people's sexual perception of who I am. And other people are not ever going to stop perceiving me in a sexual light. Primarily sexual. And it just dawned on me. And it was like, wow, okay. I suppose it could be worse. I mean, it is what it is. I'm not upset about it, and I'm not traumatized by it, but it's something I really didn't expect. I thought eventually, people would see me as a person and not as a sex thing. And after getting all these comments where people, random strangers, are calling me like a pervert and a pedophile, I mean, just because people think about you as a sex object, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing, right? And everybody in this comment section, they're just sexualizing the living hell out of me. And then they're accusing me of being hypersexual or, whatever. And I'm sitting there, and it's really kind of fascinating because it's like, you only see that part of me. That's the only part of me that you're aware of. From the time that I started interacting with you right up till the present, and probably for the foreseeable future, the only thing you're going to talk with me about is sex. You're going to talk with me about sex, and you're going to talk with me about how I'm bad because of sex. I didn't start this. You did. You brought this into the conversation. You have all these assumptions about my sexuality that don't actually reflect any of the realities of my sexuality at all. You are assuming that I want things in a sexual way that I would never want in a sexual way, but you're assuming that I would, because the only thing that you see when you see me is sex. And you might be sitting there saying, well, I mean, you did kind of put yourself out there. This is a sexual YouTube channel. And it's like, well, yes, but it's been that way since I was like 14 years old, 13 years old. It's been that way my entire life. You know, from the moment I hit puberty, moving on from there, people have always, and I'm not just talking about guys, I'm not talking about men, women too, always perceive me sexually. With the occasional exception, and those exceptions are fun. It's like, oh, you're such a breath of fresh air. This is nice, you know? And some people, like, and maybe this is it. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is how all people interact with all other people. And there's just something screwy in my head where I'm just kind of oblivious to it most of the time. Because when I interact with people, like, I don't care. I don't care. And I don't feel attraction to other people very often. In fact, that's one thing that was really beneficial to me in the strip club, because I was dead sober all the time. Never drank, never did drugs. And I didn't feel physical attraction to virtually anybody. It was extremely rare for me, it is even to this day, extremely rare for me to feel physical attraction to another human being. And when I do, it's usually very shocking and somewhat alarming to me because I'm not used to it, and it frightens me, because for the most part I don't feel it. I don't feel physical attraction to other people. And so, I mean, I could flirt with guys all night and it'd be like, I'm not feeling a damn thing here. Like, other people, they get to go on that roller coaster ride and they have to navigate all those feelings and shit. Me, I do not. And so I don't know what other people experience. I don't know what's normal for other people to experience. But it's starting to dawn on me, like as of today, that other people perceive me in this just incredibly sexual light. And I was just kind of clueless about that. And you'd think that it would be a good thing. Like, on the one hand, it's like, oh, well, that's a good thing, right? It means you're sexy, right? No. No. Just because people see you as a sexual thing, I'm not even going to, I don't want to say object, but basically a sexual thing, that doesn't mean that it's a good thing. Because, you know, what are the terms that I'm hearing thrown at me most often these days? Pervert, pedophile, child groomer. These are the words that people want to use. Sexual stuff, right? And it doesn't matter that it doesn't have a thing to do with reality. It doesn't matter that I have absolutely no interest in any of that stuff. It's a sex thing, right? And if you're talking about trans issues and you're identifying, it doesn't really matter if you're an autoandrophile because it's close enough to being trans, right? So you're a tranny to me, man. So you must be trans, therefore you must be a pedophile because all trans people are pedophiles, right? People on minds are not so good with the not so good with the grayscale thinking. It's very black and white, and it's very identitarian. extremely identitarian. And they blame other people for that, but they still can't step outside of that identitarian mindset at all. Like, it's just, you're asking too much if you expect them to be capable of thinking outside of identitarian terms. It's really kind of disappointing, because then they go off on a rant about how they're challenging the status quo, and they're being free thinkers and free speech and all that shit. And it's like, they don't have a clue. They're just completely unaware. It's obliviousness. It's amazing. But it's always about sex. Whenever it's got anything to do with me, it's always about sex. And it's like, well, you shouldn't have had a sex channel on YouTube. You shouldn't be on social media talking about sex if you don't want people to sexualize you. No matter what I do, no matter where I go, no matter how old I get, I'll be 80 years old someday. And when I'm 80 years old, I'm sure there's going to be at least a couple people who will sexualize me. And I don't mean in the good, fun, sexy way, like, oh, that's a hot granny right there. No, I mean like the, ew, can you believe anybody ever was willing to touch that? Yeah, because once upon a time, I wasn't 80 years old. Once upon a time, I was actually kind of hot. You do realize that age is a thing that happens to people over the course of time, right? Like, they don't always come, like, they don't come out of the womb looking like that. Nobody came into this world looking 80 years old and then just stayed that way. I mean, I guess there's certain physiological deformities, and people are always going to evaluate me on this level, and it's just, I guess, something that, I mean, I've always talked about it. And it was like, well, yeah, human beings always evaluate each other sexually, whether they're consciously aware of it or not, because, I mean, we have to assess one another for sexual value. That's a huge part of the process of being human. It's a huge part of the process of being any biological entity. So, of course, humans are not exempt from that part of the experience. But the intensity of it is something that I never really fully appreciated until this morning. And I'm just kind of like, okay, I guess everybody's going to see me as a sex object now. And everybody has seen me as a sex object this entire time, so it's not like anything's changed. I'm just aware of it now. Well, I guess I'm just going to go right back to doing exactly what I was doing before. Nothing's changed. I'm just aware of a new layer of existence that I was not aware of before. My perception has been altered. It was interesting. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later.